America, but also in the world. It is March 14th, 2022, and it's a beautiful day. And why is it a beautiful day? Because in research for this program, I learned so much, and I hope all of you will learn as much as I did by the time this program is over. You are listening to the new WCEG, and we welcome you. This program is Issues and Answers, and I am your host, Norman A. Carter Jr. Yep, that's me. Now, on your computer or smartphone, you can view or hear us by typing in WCEGtalkradio.com in your browser, hit enter, and on the next screen, click the live stream tab. On your smart TV, just click the YouTube icon and search for WCEG Network. WCEG stands for ding, ding, Worldwide Community Empowerment Group. Our programming goal is to leave you more informed and more empowered than you were before you tuned in. Our motto, we speak life into the community. Now, you may like us on Facebook, and you can view us live there. You can follow us on Twitter and on Instagram at WCEG_talk_radio and at WCEG Network. Now, the topics and opinions on Issues and Answers, especially today, are those of me, Norman A. Carter Jr., and my guest host, Dr. John Torrey, not the WCEG Network. So leave my boss alone, send her no letters or cards, unless they're saying, thank you for WCEG, because this is my show, and these are my words and the words of my guest. So open your ears, open your minds, and get ready to learn. Please take notes or watch replays of this program on YouTube at any time. Now, this installment of Issues and Answers is subtitled Beyond the Bank. Now, I borrowed that title from a dissertation by our guest host, Dr. John Torrey of SUNY Buffalo State College. Today, we are going to discuss reparations. Now, reparations go far beyond government-sanctioned slavery. It includes hundreds of years of dehumanizing treatment of people of color that were sanctioned by Jim Crow laws, educational segregation, lack of employment opportunities, and the resultant poverty, and abuses within the criminal justice system. Now, those of you who have read my autobiography, The Long Blue Walk, My Journey as a Philly Cop, are aware of the many abuses of African Americans that I not only exposed, but also interceded and stopped. Many of those same abuses continue today, and that is why law enforcement professionals treat my story as if it were reading some disease. They fail to realize that the disease to fear is within them. And revelation, accountability, reconciliation, and reparation are signposts on the road to making America live up to its boasted promise of life, liberty, and justice for all. The topic of reparations for governmentally sanctioned abuses of African Americans is a subject, that is more prohibitive to discuss than critical race theory. By the way, most of the people who debate critical race theory have no idea what they're talking about. And most can tell you nothing about Professor Kimberly Crenshaw Williams and what she accomplished in the 1980s. The discussion of these topics becomes the sodium pentothal that reveals deeply ingrained racial biases and the cultural insecurities of the beneficiaries of slavery, segregation, and societal alienation of a people more easily recognized by the color of their skin than the content of their character. Now, this brings us to our guest host today, Dr. John Torrey. And let me give you a brief introduction of background of Dr. Torrey. He is an assistant professor of philosophy and a contributing professor of the Africana Studies Unit of SUNY Buffalo State. He holds a BA in philosophy and Spanish, Espanol, from Morehouse College, and an MA and PhD in philosophy from the University of Memphis. His research interests are in the intersection of social and political philosophy and African-American philosophy, specifically how social recognition affects moral and political deliberations regarding calls for Black reparations in America, applied ethics and pre-college philosophy. He has published on the theoretical underpinnings of Black Lives Matter and doing pre-college philosophy, and was featured on the Unmute podcast in 2020. He has also developed pre-college philosophy programs since 2010, including the July 2019 Buffalo State Lyceum. He currently serves on the board of Plato, that's Philosophy Learning and Teaching Organization, and was recently appointed to Buffalo Mayor Byron Brown's commission to recommend police policy and advance social reconstruction. That's close to my heart. Dr. Torrey, welcome to WCEG Issues and Answers.
Thank you very much, Mr. Carter. That is I like how you do those intros. It got me ready to go. I also have to be upfront. I have a class that I am actively teaching at the moment, so it'd be against FERPA laws to put them on camera, but they are here. They will be listening, and fingers crossed they'll answer or ask a question or two. If they answer a question, that means I did a really good job teaching. So if y'all answer before me, don't hesitate. I'm okay with it.
Absolutely.
And I appreciate the opportunity to have this conversation with y'all. This has been my research. I've been working on basically since 2015 or 16 when I had a firm idea of what I was going to work on for my doctorate. The idea of reparations really rang home for me as something that needed to be addressed from a philosophical perspective. And I thought there were some neat things that we could actually tap into that hadn't been discussed nearly as much as they could be with regards to things like moral rights possession, the idea of social recognition, and perhaps most importantly, just what are the big hiccups that are preventing people from getting reparations.
Perfectly. I just wanted to know if you can inform our audience about what stirred your interest in this topic and your quest for reparations for African Americans.
Okay. So the short version is I went back to college. I went back to graduate school, and actually the article that I was going over with my class is an article by Rodney Roberts called "Why Have the Injustices Committed Against Black Americans Not Been Rectified?" And it invigorated me and going, oh my God, that is a question we need to ask more. Why hasn't it happened? And so reading that article, I had a really good mentor in Bill Lawson, and he just encouraged me to explore if this is something that's kind of getting your mind jazzed up. You might want to pursue this a little bit further because there may be stuff there that we've missed as the professionals so far that you can add on to. And that's one of the beautiful things about a generational transfer of information is, Bill as an OG of sorts, he's going, well, yeah, we did all this kind of work. There's room for you to build on it. And that encouragement really helped give me to view this as a problem I could take up. And I was very concerned about the idea of social recognition, what that article picked up. I'm pointing back because we were just talking about it. So
no problem.
But that article really got me thinking about what an important role social recognition plays with regard to how policies get made, with regard to how people get treated, and ultimately with regard to something like how reparations, or put differently, rectification can happen for the injustices Black people have experienced in America.
I noticed, and this is why I'm telling my audience to get their pens and pencils out. Rectificatory justice.
I feel like I should pull it out. Can I put it in the chat box somewhere? Like I'll put it in the. I'll put it in the chat in there so someone else can spell it. It's a mouthful.
Yes.
Rectificatory justice is a way of thinking about, it's a funny word, but it basically means setting the whole of the unjust situation right. So when we think about justice, we think about it in a number of different terms. The primary way we think about it is something like distributive justice. So we have rights, we have privileges. We want to make sure we distribute those rights and privileges in an appropriate manner so that everybody gets them. Where we see something like rectificatory justice, or the idea of rectification, is when one of those rights gets violated. Those privileges that should be extended are rescinded, they're taken away. Well, we have to rectify this injustice. And so really the goal of rectificatory justice is to rectify the whole of the unjust situation, which means there are a few different ways to pull that off. But what it does mean is that there's no one size fits all path to rectifying injustice. It allows for various ways to address various types of injustices.
And I think when we talk about reparations, I think the misconception, and you sort of bring that out in your Beyond the Bank, the misconception is that, okay, the government's going to mail out a check to every Black person and this is going to satisfy. And I think that that's something that needs to be clarified.
Okay, I appreciate this, Mr. Carter. You teeing me up. Like this is it's a wonderful day. By the way, it is March the 14th, which is 314 day, and I am a proud son of St. Louis, hence why I got my cardinal red on. So this,
All right.
We're rolling well. I do think there's a real issue with the idea of what I call rectification as compensation with regards to rectifying Black injustices committed against Black people in America. Certainly, there are a lot of different reasons to compensate, just pay out money. So if, I get in an accident, I can sue the person who hit me in the car, and if my body's not all that harmed, you should give me some money, and it helps to soothe the ills that I've received. But the kinds of ills that we're talking about that Black people are receiving, they're not just the kinds of ills that money alone can cure. So case in point, a lot of the money that gets paid out, so let's say they, everything goes smoothly and we're able to do reparations, and they say, here's the $10 billion fund, and every Black person's getting $50,000, and everyone starts screaming in the streets, and it's going to be fantastic. Until there's a lot of debt that Black people are in that's unnecessarily, that they've been unnecessarily placed in because of things like subprime mortgages, the kind of stuff that blew up the 2008 housing crisis, poor banking options where they're getting taken advantage of with regards to not being able to receive business loans. So, or getting loans with more, with less favorable rates. And thankfully, there's going to be a lot of money going back to the state in terms of fines, fees, tickets that were overdue, that because, well, frankly, Black people don't have a ton of liquid money because of the kind of discrimination that happens in job and wages. There's going to be a lot of money that, you pay it out to us, half it's going back. Right. So now we're not even, if the actual value of the fund is to try to compensate for the harms that have happened, and the compensation itself doesn't even change the harms. We're paying you up, like you give us the money, we give it right back to you.
Exactly.
I don't know if that actually is compensated. And additionally to that, we're still living in the same system that required reparations to get paid out, that required some sort of a response to address the unjust situation. And it strikes me that responding to and repairing the whole of the unjust situation means that we shouldn't still be in the same system that requires something like a form of reparations to try to address injustice. We should also be trying to address the systemic injustices as part of rectifying the whole of the injustice.
Little disclaimer to our audience. I don't want you to think that this is just a platform that's being supported by Dr. Torrey and his group of students, or that the misperception that there's a Huey Newton-like figure sitting in a wicker chair and who's asking for Black reparations for Black people. Let me read this to you. The 2008-2009, the U.S. House Resolution 194 and the Senate Concurrent Resolution. That's the United States House and United States Senate, made a formal apology to the African-American community for centuries of brutal dehumanization and injustices. Plus, there was an admission that African-Americans continue to suffer from the complex interplay between slavery and Jim Crow long after both systems were formally abolished through enormous damage and loss, both tangible and intangible, including the loss of human dignity. Now, that just slaps in the face everybody who talks about critical race theory.
Just a bit. I mean, that we have our, what is it, the largest the largest governing body that we've got available is the U.S. House. It's the most bodies that say their thumb up or thumb down on something matters. And they went thumb up on a resolution that is very clear on saying it's on us as a country, as a government. We have sanctioned policies that have caused this kind of harm. As a society, we have condoned these policies that have been causing harm. And as a community, we've left a group behind. That is the language inside that that House resolution. And it is one of the things I appreciate is that they say things like, we acknowledge the fundamental injustice, cruelty, brutality, and inhumanity of slavery and Jim Crow. We acknowledge that slavery is incompatible with the basic founding principles recognized in the Declaration of Independence. Expresses its commitment to rectify the lingering consequences of the misdeeds committed against African Americans under slavery and Jim Crow, and to stop the occurrence of human rights violations in the future. That's the level, that's rectificatory justice, right? We acknowledge the harm that we've done. We acknowledge the harms we've been doing. We know that they can't continue, that that's a wrong, and that part of our responsibility is to set the unjust situation right. So these misdeeds that have continued, the lingering consequences that continue, they have to be addressed as part of rectifying the whole of the injustice.
In church, they would say amen. What impact did Special Field Order number 15, enacted on January 16th, 1865, have on you and your research?
So for those of you who don't know of Field Note 15, that's where we get the famous 40 acres and a mule claim. So we've got Black people who've been helping the Union Army. They've been trailing Sherman, like there's a big group of sorts that he's been collecting as he's been trailing across. And he's like, well, at the end of the war, we have to reward this service. We should give them 40 acres and a mule. It gives us a sense of what compensation. It gives us a sense of how important compensation is for the unpaid labor that Black people have had across this country for at this point now centuries. And so one of the important things I think about 40 acres and a mule is that it underscores that compensation is necessary. I want to make sure I am crystal clear on this. Anytime I do this, my mom talks about this, she'll say, let me know when they mail the check. And I'm like, yeah, because compensation is necessary. It's just not sufficient. The money is needed. The resource, the wealth gap between Black and white Americans, the resource gap that exists, again, a wage gap, there's an employment gap, there's a hiring gap, and a lot of this is built on the backs of discrimination. This is to bridge those gaps requires resources, right? And when we think about things like, Bob, keep looking back, talked about redlining earlier today in class. That is a explicit lack of, that's an expenditure of buying a home is a resource that you can use to ultimately develop and pass down. It's a way of doing wealth building, and Black people were ultimately elbowed out of that opportunity. Part of what it takes to close this debt is to pay the debt. And that's one of the things that I think is really important about Field Note 15. 40 acres and a mule, I'd love to get 40 acres and a mule. I'd probably be able to do something good with it. Mm-hmm. Give me something similar. Respond to the needs I have for compensation for the work that I've been putting in. And I think it's also a lot of the impetus behind the pushes for reparations, for rectification. It's respond to what I have endured and show me respect for what I put in. Right? So recognize what I put in.
And you may have touched on this, but we had a question come in. What is the difference between 40 acres and a mule, and what we're looking for today?
So I guess the actual difference is, I don't think people are looking for, well, let me put it this way. There is no limit to how we can understand what the nature of the material request could be. So if we could get 40 acres and a mule now, presuming it would effectively provide the kind of material compensation that we're looking for to help close those gaps, that would be worthwhile. I'm not entirely sure that the 40 acres and the mule alone would get that job done. So it would reflect to look in potentially in different ways. So I'm thinking of the work of William Darity out at Duke. He's done a lot of this work from the economic side. to explain that there are different ways in which we could parse out what reparations would look like. One of them would be the traditional lump sum. So there'd be just a lump sum payment of some sort. Another way would be in-kind payments. So free schooling, post-secondary, reductions on, say, things like medical insurance, things of that sort, to try to help close those debts. Another way is having a fund of sorts. Imagine a grant fund available for all Black people to pull from, where they can get support for various individual projects, business ideas and the like, or just actually having a fund available where you do get access to support for things like, again, schooling, business development, and housing. Right, like, so there are a number of different ways in which we can look at the material needs being addressed, but ultimately 40 acres and a mule to me does mean we need to be providing some sort of material compensation to Black people in America, however that material compensation is best understood. And I do think one of the good things about Darity's work is that he says it's not just one or the other. We can do all of these and more at the same time to try to touch as many different ways as possible to cover those material gaps.
What do you feel is the political atmosphere for that now, as far as our legislators go? I know that there's a growing interest in by the public in this topic, but is that being communicated to our legislators?
It's really interesting that you said that, because I looked this up earlier today, and apparently February 9th of this past year, Representative Al Green introduced a bill to Congress, to the House, that condemns racism and invidious discrimination as evil and antithetical to the U.S. Constitution, and declares unconditional war on racism and invidious discrimination in America.
Wow.
That kind of language getting put inside of a House resolution, even if it does, so it went to the Judiciary Committee. We'll see if it ever makes it out and gets full vote and whatnot. But that kind of language being placed inside of a bill from a Texas member of the House suggests to me that, I always take a bit of a pessimistic tack. I'd rather, be safe than sorry. I think there's a sea change of some sort. How big of a sea change, I'm not entirely sure, but I do believe strongly that political pressure is something that has slowly but surely developed in such a way that we've seen reparations bills get signed and actually be put into effect in, let's see here, Evanston, Illinois, in Asheville, North Carolina. The state of California signed a bill to investigate, basically their version of HR 40. They signed a bill to investigate and come up with a task force to recommend on reparations. So we've seen what political pressure can look like in such a way that it gets things over the line in a way that wouldn't have been available. But to the other part of your question, I'm not sure if there's much public desire for this. I genuinely don't know how much the public actually cares for having this kind of, if you want to call it a wealth transfer, how much they care. I'm not sure how much they care to recognize these harms as harms worthwhile for rectifying. They may think, we've been all right. I always think about a live stream I watched when there was a protest in front. So again, proud son of St. Louis. I was watching a protest in front of Busch Stadium in the fall of 2014, and a young woman was walked past them and said, "But we gave you your freedom. Like, what else do you want? Like, we're done here, man." So I take that as part of the public view with regards to something like rectifying anti-Black injustice. Some people are going to look at this and go, "What else do you like?" I think about the life that my grandmother's lived, and she's in her 90s, but my father is in his mid 70s, and here's me in my early 30s. We've lived three very different lives inside of the same spaces, and and so that does say something, I think, about social progress in a way. But if you just go, "We gave you your freedom," as though there's nothing else to rectify, then we're really missing the boat on having our the injustices that we receive be recognized. And I don't know how well that's going to move soon. I hope more people recognize it.
Yeah, that's almost like the people who said, well, we gave you an African-American president. There's no prejudice in the country.
You got it.
Yeah.
John McWhorter wrote that article, and I remember reading that. It was in Forbes in like the fall of '08. Like, hey, it was called The End of Racism. Like, what else do you want? Black guy in the highest office. But I think again it's a great way of obfuscating and for ignoring the meat of the issue, which is what are the systemic harms that have been happening and that continue to happen that ultimately prevent Black people from being able to live their fullest, most freest lives in this country. If these are systems that have continued to do this harm. And again, we went through the history, slavery, post-Reconstruction, Pleasant vs. Ferguson, Black codes, sundown towns, the brutality that we have to exist and get through in the civil rights movement, police brutality, mass incarceration, and redlining. If all of these systems are still in place, or the remnants of these systems are still in place, causing harms, then I'm not sure how much a Black president could do the job.
Mm-hmm.
And
it's going to take more than one. But keeping in line with the amount of public concern, I was surprised because believe me, I learned a lot in preparing for this program. And St. Petersburg, Florida, 2021, their city council approved the creation of a reparations program and the implementation of an equity officer in response to a study that identified structural racism in that state. The program will establish affordable housing, educational opportunities, and other means of economic development that would contribute to an equal environment for Black residents. And this is somewhat similar to what happened in Chicago, I think a couple of years ago, as far as the housing goes.
Yes, just outside of Chicago's a suburb, yeah.
So there is a growing interest. How much it has grown, I agree with you, but there's movements in some governments.
What I had was that St. Petersburg one is it's nice to hear that it's happening across different kinds of states, right? Like, so North Carolina is a very specific kind of state. So is Florida, so is California, so is Illinois. So to see it across like what is effectively a broad swath of different parts of the country, to see this kind of initiative get some uptake, it is promising. It does give me a concern, which is, and Darity brings this up in some work that he had recently done as well, the actual financial total, in order to pull this off and genuinely rectify the whole of the injustices, it's enough that it's more than the combined budgets of all the states. The combined budget of all the states won't be able to cover what's required to pay out reparations for Black people in America, according to Darity's research. And so that does give me pause to go, if we're thinking about who should do it, we have to look to the highest. So this does need to come from, I think, the federal government to be the official sort of rectificatory reparations policy. The way I think about it for states, cities, and even for individuals, it may well be necessary for all of them to participate because they've all got a piece of the debt to pay. But it's not going to be sufficient because they won't be able to match the depth of the debt, if that makes sense. They got great credit, but it's not enough.
Mm-hmm. That's the beginning. Got to start somewhere.
Right. I like the idea too, that this is the kind of thing that can roll to ultimately put more pressure on at the federal level to kick off a much larger, more expansive approach to something like this. So
are you aware of the Jesuit Conference of Priests and what they did in 2021?
The Judgment Conference?
The Jesuit Conference of Priests.
No, I'm not.
They pledged to raise $100 million for the descendants of enslaved people. And this pledge is the largest monetary effort of the Roman Catholic Church to atone for its role in slavery. And $15 million has already been deposited into a trust as of March 2021. So that's
a lot of that amount of money being pledged from inside the Jesuit Church again shows, Mr. Carter, I think you may be onto something, that there's a slow but sure tide spinning to try to address harms and rectify them in some way, shape, or form. And if we're getting it from the Jesuit Church, that's, nothing, I'm not trying to, down talk or up talk, just it's a institution, and seeing that from an institutional level, that's the kind of turn that we want to see. That's going to be the evidence that we know a turn is happening, that we should really believe in, is when we see things happen at an institutional level, where it's not just, a person or two trying to gin things up, but you see full, I think the Jesuit church says as its message, we're going to do this for these reasons. When we see something like the United States government says, much like it did for the Civil Liberties Act 1988, and like it echoed for the House resolution in 2008, we're trying to own up to the responsibility that we've got as an institution.
Yeah, and this whole idea of reparations is not something that came about in 1990 or 2022. I mean, there are incidents where we can go back, I think, as far as 1865, where there were reparations paid to individual slaves as opposed to slaves as a group.
Yes. I'm trying to remember that there's a specific case where somebody sued to get individual reparations for their own having been enslaved, and it was done in a specific way such that we couldn't revisit it and go, look, we should all be able to get that same sort of lawsuit. But that it's happened is it's I'm trying to think of a good way of describing it. It gives us a reason to be hopeful, and I think part of what it takes to be able to rectify injustice and respond to injustice is having a hope that your society will ultimately be able to look at you, respect you, the conditions you and your people are in, and go, we have to do better by you. And I don't think you get to that spot without some sense of hope in the community that you're in.
And I think the sense of hope that you speak of, I think it's very important. We had a discussion, or I had a discussion with some family members. We visited the African American Historical and Cultural Museum in Washington, D.C. And as a family, we got into a discussion about Black on Black crime. And one of my older relatives brought up a point that's probably germane to what we're talking about, and that years of slavery and discrimination and inequitable treatment brought about this sense of self-hatred that becomes evidence in things like the preponderance of violence, excessive violence in our communities. And that's possibly due to a mental devaluing of who and what we are.
So, continue. I'm sorry.
Oh no. So what I'm asking that this is part of the damage that's done, that you can't put a dollar value on. That's
yes. I completely agree. The idea that this is intraracial harm that has happened because of things like, so I mean, keep in mind, most crime is done intraracial. So most white people harm white people, most Black people harm Black people, most Hispanic harm Hispanic people. But that said, not all of these things are happening inside of the exact same social context, right? So
correct.
The ways in which we've been, I don't want to say socialized, but certainly been culturally inculcated, like the way in which our culture tells us we ought move and do like this, it certainly does lead itself to more dust-ups amongst the group, we might say. And that is a problem, I think, that is connected to, as you mentioned, how we are. So I keep everything in a frame of social recognition. I think there's both external and an internal, right? Like, so there's how society views us, and there's also how we view ourselves as members of society. And then part of that social recognition may be that we're not showing ourselves the same sort of respect that we would want to. But I don't think that's necessarily gonna it doesn't necessarily impede the requirements of others who have done harm to us to be able to pay their debt.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely.
Right? We've got internal work we have to deal with, in part because of the systems that we've had to live through and experience. Some of this is we're surviving through trauma to try to make the best space we can. And some of this is, the space has significantly wounded us. And we just haven't found ways to navigate those wounds. But I do want to make sure I'm at the very least very clear. Black on Black crime is it sucks that it happens.
Mhm.
And we should do more to address it. And I want to make sure at least to big up and say and shout out folks that actively are working in communities across this country to try to make sure that we get more of the spirit of community in our community, as opposed to sitting idly by. Because again, are you recognizing yourself as a member of a community that needs assistance? And if you are you trying to make yourself of assistance? That's, do you have that ethos or not? And that's the kind of ethos we need to have this kind of policy. We need this to be around, but everyone needs to have this I call it a sense of justice, right? I get this from Rodney Roberts' work as well. This idea of having a sense of justice. I'm moved to do something, even if it doesn't affect me directly. I have to step in because I see harm happening. And that's developing that sense of justice for the non-Black community towards Black people and the harm is being done. It's a similar sort of idea for us developing a sense of justice internally so that we're doing right by each other intentionally and with the goal of trying to build a better community.
Okay, I didn't want to overly dominate this in your class. I don't know whether they have any questions to.
Oh, they just say my bacon. They got a charger for me. My views went down. I keep saying it, now it's live. I'm this on YouTube. There's gonna be some A's given out in this class. I mean this. A's given out. Okay. So, Mr. Carter's open the floor to you all. You've heard the conversation. We've been talking about the Roberts article. Open the questions. What you got? Yes.
You talked about how the generations before you lived very different lives and your parents and your grandparents. What would you have to say to our generation about how to pursue things like reparations?
Ooh. Okay, so the question asked was, I got to see things between my parents and my grandparents generationally. What should I advise you all, or if someone from you all are Gen Zers, if the Gen Zs ask, what should they do to try to pursue reparations? What kind of, advice I would provide for them? Oh, Anna, why do you ask good questions? So, the short answer to that is what I have seen in the last 8 to 10 years has been primarily younger people who have organized, who have done a lot of the steamrolling of sorts, and made it very crystal clear that this is something that they stand for, something they require, whatever the thing may be. So when we think about, say, Black Lives Matter, we think Occupy Wall Street. Like Occupy was a bunch of young people for the most part living in Central Park. But when we see things, and as far back as civil rights movement, right, the SCLC, Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, it's largely young people that get this done. So if you see this as a need that should be addressed, find like-minded individuals who share the same purpose, passion, and values, because there is no Martin Luther King, Malcolm X, one shot, that's not going to work. I think if there's anything I have seen over the last number of years, is that it takes a coalition of the willing to be able to get things across a finish line. This ain't one-on-one basketball, it's football. It takes all 11 to do the job. Right? So I'd say find like-minded people and be very clear on what it is that you want done. So if you want reparations for Black Americans, what's the cause, what's the reason, what's the goal, and where do you take it? And the good news is those organizations already exist to some degree, and more and more younger people are also on the hook trying to get this rolling. So you'll be able to find more of those people, and you all know technology, so you can find them. Drop that. Y'all got Discord. There's a Discord server somewhere right now talking about reparations, right? Like there's a Twitch stream where they're not playing any games. They're talking about reparations. So I would say, yeah, find your community, get into that community, and make sure you have the be clear on being able to explain the rationale for why you participate and what you participate in and what you want to get out of this, right? Like, I'm trying to see a better world for me and my children. That means something, right? I'm trying to see a better world for my friends and family. That means something. I'm trying to participate in a better world. That means something. Yeah.
Race. Black members, the same people who like.
Okay. I actually think so. The question was, is there like an explicit connection between rectificatory justice and race? And the example given was, say you have a black man and a white man do the same crime. Would we see more of a call for try to rectify some sort of an injustice for the black guy versus the white guy? I'm actually gonna answer. I think your question's got the answer inside it. So rectificatory justice is a way of responding to an unjust situation, to set it right, right? It's, at least based on how we've painted it out, a bit more likely that somebody who is raced, as opposed to somebody who's raced as a person of color, someone's raced as black, is more likely to be perhaps the victim of injustice in such a way that we want to try to respond with rectificatory justice at like a systemic level. And on the flip side, generally speaking, one of the reasons why mass incarceration works so well is because when there's a black guy and a white guy do the same crime, we tend to have the black guy getting more time for those same crimes. So, and that will be an issue to be addressed by rectificatory. That's an unjust situation that's continuing, that has to get solved up. And that's going to be done. There will be some racial, connections in how that would be addressed. Right? So it's not explicit, right? It's like if you hear rectificatory justice, it's not necessarily with people of color or black people, but certainly in how we're talking about it here, there's going to be a racial connection. Does that make sense? Good question, Joe. We're gonna keep rolling. You tell me,
okay.
Stop, Mr. Carter, because I'll just let class happen on the radio right now.
We did get a question from Facebook, a comment. It says that there's a group of white people. This is from Reverend Diane Doherty. There's a group of white people that created funds for reparation now, and it's for the National African American Reparations Committee. And she says that we are working to fund a center for the Chattahoochee Brick Company here in Atlanta. There's a history on that, and they've raised $140,000 to build a museum in Elaine, Arkansas, for the massacre of 1912. So
that's impressive work being done by. So that's individual work done by community members. What that sounds like, yeah.
Yes.
And then they got other members of the community together to try to build up funds with an express goal of trying to address some of the injustices inside their community and create monuments so that we don't keep on acting like these injustices didn't happen. Am I following right?
Exactly.
That's
exactly.
I catalog that inside of the. It may be necessary, it's not going to be sufficient, but I'm going to go with, I think it's necessary, because this is a way for us of seeing more and more social uptake behind the idea of we have to respond to these injustices. We have to acknowledge them. That's part of social recognition, is having your own history acknowledged in a full way to explain how you've gotten to this spot. That is part of what they're trying to do here. So I take those things to be necessary. I don't want to commit myself to saying that they're doing full-blown reparations projects in the same sort of way, but I do want to say that they're doing the kind of work that's necessary for us to ultimately get something like rectificatory justice at a full level. If people aren't putting in $150,000 to try to make monuments and be explicit in trying to prevent people from being ignorant about the history of racial strife in their community, that's the kind of stuff where you can get political pressure. Because now if you can raise 150 and that goes well, you can mess around and raise 500. And now you've got an opponent for somebody who's against critical race theory in school, right? And that's if we're thinking about things that can limit people's ability to grasp just how poorly socially recognized Black people have been and how woefully ignored our history has been. Losing critical race theory inside of our schooling and losing the ability to even talk about, say, race, that's going to be another spot where, there you go. You want to know what else to do? Make sure we can talk about race in schooling. Otherwise, we're going to be in trouble. Because, I mentioned to them earlier, the Civil Liberties Act of 1988 included public funding to make sure that that our society was educated about the atrocities that we committed to Japanese Americans in World War II. That means that every single one of them, myself included, I was taught about a Japanese internment in World War II. That's the kind of level of commitment we would need to have with regards to teaching about the Black experience in America and the depths of how woeful it has been with regards to why Black people are in the position that we're in, and a lot of times in this country, and why we make the claims for things like reparations, improved policies, less discrimination, more safety, better schooling. All of it is tied to that.
Before we get back to your questions from your class, we do have a comment from Facebook. I don't want you to get too overwhelmed by this, but it says Professor Torrey may very well be the next icon for social consciousness in Black America.
I have a feeling I know
Yeah.
whoever that person is. It must be someone I know personally. I don't know who it might be. You gotta be kidding me. Okay.
Total loss of decorum here.
You know, you can't have fun on the radio. I'm not sure when you can have fun, Mr. Carter.
Absolutely. We're back to open it. If anyone has any questions here, please.
About social recognition and how that played a part in Japan receiving Rectificatory justice versus Black people,
Mhm.
and Ronnie, I say or whatever, but he talked about how like we won't be viewed the same way because in part we were granted versus Japan who lost the war in a fight.
Right.
So what I want to ask you, in terms of, let's say reparations, we do get that. What would that do to how we're still socially recognized if we're still
Okay.
going to be considered
Good.
granted?
Good question. Okay, so the question he asked was with regards to social recognition. Let's just say, so the piece we went over, the foundational piece for me in this stuff is by Rodney Roberts, and one of the things he articulates is we have to provide like an explanation for why this worked out well for but why reparations as a policy was able to happen for Japanese Americans, but it wasn't able to happen for Black Americans. And one of the things he postulates here is, well, it's possible that the way we're being socially recognized is one where we're just not being respected as people who are worthy of having those harms rectified. And in the case of Japanese Americans, there was enough in the history of the community, the history of the culture, and in fact, the how similar, in fact, in some ways, you can understand how the Japanese American experience is, and the experience from Japan as an empire looks similar to how the American empire grew. And again, it's closer to the white American than perhaps the Black American experience in some way, shape, or form. And so he was asking, what ultimately does this mean for if we were to have reparations granted? How would that change how Black people are socially recognized? Like, would that be a signal that we receive respect? Would it require respect, or would it change? Will it change it at all? Answer is that, am I grabbing you? Okay. The answer I will give is it requires a change in social recognition. I'm going to be hard and fast on that. I don't think there's a way we can get to reparations, rectificatory justice in some meaningful way without a significant overhaul on how Black people are socially recognized. So I like the answer would be yes for you. Yeah, there will be a change in how we're socially recognized if we're able to get reparations in some way, shape, or form, because to me, that has to happen. We're sitting here on that, what did I say, less favorable side of social recognition. We're too many hurdles to hop. We have to be on the more favorable side in order to get more support, more interest. And we've seen that. I mean, so again, think about how much things, I want to say things have changed, but how much things might feel different since George Floyd, Brown Taylor's murders. It's just like, even if they're not changed all the way, things feel different. That might be the rumbling of a sea change that's coming in some way, shape, or form that's connected to all of these kinds of issues. Does that answer your question?
Yeah.
Good. Does that, are we?
No, you're good. Okay.
Other questions? Go.
So what is your thoughts on the impact of ideas like white guilt towards reparations? Do you think it's like something harmful or beneficial towards gaining reparations?
Good. What do I make of white guilt as a concept, and how does that work with trying to gain or lose, or in the process of gaining reparation? Useful tool. That'd be the best way I describe that. At most, it's a useful tool, but that can't be the fulcrum for justice. So guilt in and of itself, to me, will not produce a strong sense of justice. And I think about this because Jane Elliott, the anti-racist educator, she once did a program, and so she said, if you want, I'm paraphrasing, if you want to live the life that Black people in America live, stand up. And it was like a room full of white people, and nobody stood up. So she was like, maybe you didn't hear me. Like, if you want to live like a Black person in America, you want to get treated like a Black person in America, stand up. And no one stood up. So she said, what that means is, you know what's happening. You know what's going on and that it's bad. You don't want it for you, but you're willing to let it happen to someone else. And we have to wonder why that is. Right? Like, so that's the, like, white guilt will make me go, God, I don't want to be treated like them. That sucks, right? But it won't necessarily spur you to action. So a tool perhaps to get people to recognize that things are bad, as opposed to, say, Pollyanna, but I'm not sure if it's I want to say a weaponizable tool at the moment. But I'm also not a great strategist. So there may be somebody else who's deeper on the ground and goes, oh, absolutely, use white guilt, make them pay money. And that's helps to engineer, perhaps at an individual level, that sense of justice, that sense of community, that sense of need to try to address this kind of racial injustice. But at least for me, that Jane Elliott video really sticks out in my head. Like it's knowledge that does not provide desire to. Does that make sense? It's because I know something's bad and I mean I desire to change it. And I think that's an issue like it.
Open any more if you have any. We have about another 8 or 9 minutes to go. Does anything...
Oh, we got someone from the back. I love when the back people talk. Here we go.
Okay.
What you got?
Are looking recognized negatively and have in this way ever since settler colonialism in America reformed like idea of race where like you are actually bottom. This ideology is still ingrained in our system. So in which way can we remove this continuous stigma of like being recognized negatively?
Good. So the question asked, to make sure I'm getting this right, is effectively how can we change this? The ways in which we're being negatively socially recognized and how it's disfavorable across so much time. Is that?
Yeah.
Okay, I'm gonna give 2 answers to this. One of them is the stuff you're doing right here. So I can teach you all. Education would be one space, which is why this critical race theory business that Mr. Jakarta brought up, and how there are politicians and activists and community members who do not want this kind of history and legacy to be taught. It keeps this it keeps this frozen. Does that make sense? So I do think part of this is a significant re-education in terms of how we talk about and understand the Black experience in America, frankly, globally. But we're talking about it here right now. But it would be there needs to be a significant overhaul. So I mean, think about it this way: you all have all been educated in roughly either a public or a private school system in some way, shape, or form, and I guarantee you, all of you only got Black history taught during February.
Not even.
See, and then they say not even. Like I said, I'm going, oh yeah, y'all got at least 4 weeks. Some of them got 1, some of them get 2, right? That's what I mean when I say we need a significant revitalization, a revisioning of what it means to educate with the Black experience in mind, and so that you get a fullness of the picture. So that would be one way. Try to change that. I'm also I might end up, this might bite me in the behind here, but I got to lean into what works for young people. I asked you all how you learn stuff. You said TikTok. Got to lean into the technology, got to lean into the media. I do think media representation, that's been a big thing that's been a pushback of sorts by Black people and people of color generally over the last decade. And we see more and more Black and women creators, more Indigenous creators, more people of color creators. That space is where now we're changing what you're adding in new bits to the story for how society can recognize that group, that story, that history, that culture. I think that does play a role. I can't say how, I can't necessarily quantify it in the same sort of way like I might be able to with education. Like I've touched these many bodies to make sure that they have this bit of information. I'm not sure how well media works like that, but I have a feeling that's going to be one of the legs, right? Like in the civil rights movement, it wasn't until people were seeing on the nightly news every night that there are Black people getting beat by hoses and police, and the dogs are getting sicked on them, and you keep seeing that every night. it ends up in, something's wrong happening here. So I think in that same sort of way, something right's happening here is a way that media can be used, right? I mean, I think about a show like Insecure. It's going to be messy. It doesn't have to be perfect, but it's giving a different version of the story. And it's a more accurate and more full one in some ways than you're going to get from you ain't going to learn about Black people watching Friends. You just won't, right? And that's not a knock on the show, but it's a reflection on the lack of Blackness in that space. And so we get more creations that are being more overwhelmingly and purposely Black. I think that might be one of the spots. These students, I see what I like them, man.
I was going to agree with you at one point. One thing that I wrote about in my book is that a lot of police officers, their only experience with Black people is what they see on the TV news. And so the perception is that we're all bellicose people, which isn't true.
Right.
But what happens is that affects the way that you interact with people if that's your only source of reference.
You got it. That's social recognition, right? Like the only way I understand you in this society is as ne'er-do-well, criminal. But remember, and with the news, if it bleeds, it leads. So we got ne'er-do-wells, criminals, thugs, layabouts, thieves, charlatans. If this is all I understand of what you do based on the minimal exposure I have to who you are, well then yeah, I may be a bit more heavy-handed in terms of how I come across you, because I'm thinking the way I recognize you as someone who's deserving of that kind of treatment. And that's the gap in social recognition that I really want to break. And I do believe that's the gap that has to get broken if we're going to see any sort of genuine movement toward reparations at a national level. I think until then, we're going to find some good piecemeal operations that are moving the ball forward. And they'll have strengths and weaknesses and pros and cons in which, but those piecemeal operations are moving the ball forward in a way that helps us to be able to see a potential future where we do get reparations. But none of that happens until how Black people are socially recognized changes, so that the country goes, oh yeah, we should do this for you. Look at the harms we've done. We need to redress them. We need to rectify them. We need to change the whole of this unjust situation. That to me is changing social recognition.
Unbelievable. I mean, that's sort of what I said earlier at the introduction to the program about recognizing and having that conversation and accepting some accountability. And accountability means not only for things that happened that were done by your grandparents way back, but accountability for what you are doing at the moment and what you're going to do in the future. And I think that's what's lacking in our country, especially today.
I concur with you strongly. That what you call accountability, I'm gonna keep saying that's that strong sense of justice. I have a reason to change my community for the better, to address what's happened to the members in it. Even if you're the best, most well-intentioned white person who is genuinely the one that has like no racist bone in their body, you still have to have a strong sense of justice to participate in something like changing how Black people are socially recognized, in terms of changing systemic injustice and how it's affecting Black people, and trying to ultimately redress the harms in the right ways, which would be getting rectificatory justice across the finish line, and yeah, put some checks in Black people's pockets, and also change the conditions Black people are living in. We didn't all do this to ourselves. Plymouth Rock, Plymouth Rock landed on us. We did not do this to ourselves in all of sorts of ways. You know what I'm saying? We have internal stuff we have to deal with for sure, but the kinds of stuff we're talking about, the kind of systemic issues we're dealing with that I'm trying to address with regards to talking about reparations, it's at a much bigger level. And it's the kind of level that we're going to need. We need a team, right? It can't just be Black people at quarterback. We better have an offensive line and some receivers and a running back. Otherwise, this thing ain't going to work. So.
Dr. Torrey, you really hit the nail on the head. We've got only have a few seconds left for the program, but one of the reasons why I wanted more input from your students was because we need to listen to the young people, because they're going to be our vehicles for change. And old fuddy-duddies like me, we've kind of like had our thing and done our thing, but we need to educate, number one, and then we need this younger generation to grab hold of this education and make some movement. And that's how we're going to affect change. And that's how we can intelligently address this concept of reparations, what that looks like and how it feels. And Dr. Torrey, I really thank you so much for bringing this topic to America and the world. And I think just from what I've gotten initially, that there's a lot of interest in this. And I think that there's going to be a lot of response to this show. So I thank you so very, very much. I thank your students for also participating, because their questions are educating America. Thank you so very much.
Thank you, Mr. Carter. And I'm pleased. My Buffalo State's Africana philosophy class in spring 22 apparently knows how to hold their own on the radio. So well done, y'all. And thank you again, Mr. Carter, for the opportunity. If anybody wants to reach me, they can find me on social media at Mr. Philosopher 3. I'm around and about. Don't DM me too much. I don't check those. But if you need me, I'm always happy to talk about this stuff, and I always post about work. So again, I appreciate the opportunity, and hopefully we can do this again sometime soon.
Absolutely, love to. Thank you very much. And we would thank all of you who have tuned into the WCEG Network for this installment of Issues and Answers. Our special guest has been Dr. John Torrey of SUNY Buffalo State College. It was a great program, and thank you. Can't say any more than that. Thank you. Thank you from me. Thank you from America. Thank you very much.
Happy to do it.
Thank you.